Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, and things are just going from bad to worse for French President Emmanuel Macron. Once considered the darling of globalists, indeed the successor to Angela Merkel as the de facto head of Europe, Macron's globalist dreams have been crashing down to earth. He's coming under enormous scrutiny and criticism in France as events spiral out of control in a number of African nations that were once French territories. Of course, a couple of weeks back, members of the Nigerian military staged a coup, ousting their president Mohamed Bazoum, who was elected a couple of years back in Niger's first democratic transfer of power since they gained independence from France back in 1960. In doing so, Niger followed the coups of a number of other neighboring nations in the Sahel region of Africa, such as Burkina Faso and Mali. And since then, thousands of French citizens have reportedly left the Sahel region. In fact, things are so bad on the ground that a number of French senators have written an open letter to President Macron, signed by 94 parliamentarians, urging an entire reconsideration of France's policy in Africa. They're openly recognized that Russia is now the new key strategic partner of the Sahel region, with even Wagner paramilitary forces playing the role of peacekeeping troops that have largely replaced French troops who traditionally played that role. And the letter clearly laments the increasingly obvious disappearance of France from the world stage, with so many of its international ties crumbling and coming apart. Now, interestingly, it's not just French politicians that are questioning Macron's policies in Africa. In Italy, their prime minister, the ultra-populist firebrand Giorgia Meloni, who's all about Italy first, maintaining the national sovereignty of Italy's borders, she's gotten into a very public and heated war of words with French President Macron. She basically accuses of economically exploiting Africa in such a way that encourages mass migration into Europe.
Questo si chiama franco CFA. È la moneta coloniale che la Francia stampa per 14 nazioni africane, alle quali applica il signoraggio e in forza delle quali sfrutta le risorse di questa nazione. Questo è un bambino che lavora in una miniera d'oro in Burkina Faso. Il Burkina Faso è una delle nazioni più povere del mondo. Per il Burkina Faso, che ha l'oro, la Francia stampa moneta coloniale. In cambio pretende che finiscano nelle casse del tesoro francese il 50% di tutto quello che il Burkina Faso esporta. L'oro che questo bambino si infila in un cunicolo per tirare fuori finisce per lo più nelle casse dello Stato francese. Allora la soluzione non è prendere gli africani e spostarli in Europa. La soluzione è liberare l'Africa da certi europei che la sfruttano e consentire a queste persone di vivere di quello che hanno.
Now, for those of you who are listening by podcast there, she's basically saying that France still exercises enormous political and economic influence over a number of African nations. She mentioned 14 of them. And that influence involves depositing a lot of African money into French coffers, which makes it increasingly hard for Africans to make a living in Africa. And that encourages them to leave Africa, try to start a more prosperous life in Europe. And so the answer for European nations like France to stop exploiting African nations, let them live, which will in turn encourage them to live where they are and stop the massive waves of migration. But as you can see with the unfolding events, Africans in Niger and Burkina Faso, they're not waiting for the French to act. They're rising up and purging their nations of much of the French influence that remains. But unfortunately for Macron, that's just the tip of the iceberg of international humiliations. Wait until you see the latest. But first, if you're a patriot and you're not prepared to defend your home and your family, you have got to click on that link below and visit our good friends over at Countrywide Concealed and get your concealed carry permit once and for all. Gang, if you're like me, you've been putting this off, right? You've wanted to do it. You've always meant to do it. But you put it off because of all the ridiculous barriers and requirements, the pain, the hassle of getting what's ironically your constitutional right. Well, guess what, gang? There's now an amazing solution to all that. Countrywide Concealed. They are probably the quickest and easiest way for you to get your permit. And the coolest thing is that the permit is good in the vast majority of the country. This is amazing stuff. You won't just have a permit to conceal carry in your own state, but it'll be as valid in 84% of the whole of the nation. It's as quick and as easy as just watching a video and taking a quiz. And thanks to Countrywide Concealed, that's it. Your family is that much safer no matter where you go. Getting a concealed carry license has literally never been easier. Click on that link below and join the millions of patriots who've taken back their rights with Countrywide Concealed today. The latest humiliation was the very public snub of Macron by the BRICS organization, which is an ever-growing and expanding economic and political union between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Since its formation in the 2000s, the economic bloc has grown exponentially, with dozens of countries seeking to join. Nations such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Algeria, Argentina, Mexico, Nigeria, they're all lining up and applying for membership, making up 40% of the world's population. It's huge. And all eyes are fixed on their upcoming summit in just a couple of weeks in South Africa. In fact, interest is so widespread that Emmanuel Macron himself wanted to attend the summit. Unfortunately for Macron, he was emphatically not invited. All told, an astonishing 67 countries will be attending the summit, but France will not be one of them. Russia, in effect, told Macron to shove it. He's not welcome in the parallel economy that's rising through BRICS, or what's now increasingly being called BRICS Plus, since after the summit, we may see as many as a dozen, maybe even 24 nations officially joining the economic bloc. Now, why Macron wanted to attend the BRICS summit in South Africa is frankly anyone's guess. I'm assuming because he recognizes the world is increasingly moving east. The West is implacably stuck in political and economic paralysis. We can't see beyond our desperate attempts at trying to hold on to the liberal world order. So perhaps this is a signal that France really sees the future as belonging to a more Eurasian world order. We're also beginning to see the battle between BRICS and the G7, right? The group of seven heat up, in that BRICS countries control essential commodities like oil, gas, lithium, and other resources that the global economy depends on. Now, this is the devil's bargain that Western powers took over the last few decades. This is the business model of the demons in Davos over at WEF. The world, in effect, runs on finance, food, and fuel, right? Finance, food, and fuel. Up until this point, the Davos types and the liberal governments in Western nations believed that if you controlled finance, you control the world. The various BRICS countries are banking on the opposite. They believe he who controls food and fuel is the one who controls the world. And that's because, of course, you can't eat currency, right? You can't eat paper money, or you can't use digital money to heat your house. He who controls food and fuel controls the world. And so what we're witnessing increasingly is a bit of an economic showdown between the two great blocs, the G7 and by extension G20, versus BRICS, a currency-based economy versus a commodities-based economy. And as you can see with Macron and his interest in attending BRICS, that may indeed be a tacit admission that he sees the currency-based economy of Western powers reaching its limits, especially with Russian gas turned off and food and fertilizer in such short supply. So all of this is to say that things are clearly not going well for Macron. His approval ratings are on the toilet. He has some of the lowest polling in all of Europe. France's African affiliates are unraveling, and even now, economic unions want nothing to do with him. So much for the de facto head of Europe. Are you ready to join the resistance? Because I'm leading a group of dedicated, courageous patriots who can lead a spearhead into the heart of the secular globalist establishment. We punished Bud Light and Target, driven CNN and the legacy media to near bankruptcy, forced BlackRock to backtrack on ESG, and now we're seeing our conservative-dominated Supreme Court ending affirmative action and protecting religious liberty. In my Insiders Club, I show you concrete steps to take locally and online that will only keep this mass uprising going until the battle is won. Don't wait. Click the link in my description below and join my Courageous Patriots Insiders Club today.